Bo-Katan is a cautionary tale. She once laid claim to rule of Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess. But it was gifted to her and not won by creed. Bo-Katan Kryze was born of a mighty house, but they lost sight of the way. Her rule ended in tragedy. They lost their way, and we lost our world. Ever since Bo-Katan was a wee little Mandalorian, she hoped for a chance to betray her sister Satine to her death so that everyone she knew and loved would be worse off and the bad guys would prosper. Well, maybe not quite that extreme, but she was certainly not impressed with her sister's pacifistic ideologies. Against what had to be enormous opposition from the warrior people of Mandalore, Bo-Katan's sister, Duchess Satine, became ruler of Mandalore. She quickly became known for being an unreasonable pacifist and looking scary and surreal when her hair was up. She was also the only person who had gotten Obi-Wan Kenobi to consider breaking his Jedi vow of celibacy, though very few people know about that feat. However, despite Satine being pretty impressive overall, Bo-Katan wasn't really that cool with any of the stuff her sister did. She believed in embracing Mandalore's more violent and martial past, and after she had inherited an ancient set of Mandalorian armor, she rolled her eyes at Satine really hard, we can only assume since she was wearing a helmet, and flounced over to the nearest terrorist group recruiting booth. The group she joined was called Death Watch, and she would spend the majority of her early life with them. The Death Watch were led by a guy named Vizsla, which is a fun name. I wonder if his parents named him that in hopes that they'd have another son who they could call Vizsla, and then another son they could call Post-Vizsla. The world may never know. The Death Watch had all kinds of shady dealings, which got them kicked out of the Mandalore system and made them enemies of Count Dooku. Through it all, Bo-Katan served faithfully and became Vizsla's lieutenant, leading the elite group of warriors called Night Owls, which proves that owls exist in Star Wars, just like ducks. At one point, Bo-Katan met an undercover Ahsoka Tano and naturally had to slap her butt. Death Watch then tried to kill a bunch of innocent people, and Ahsoka tried to stop them and briefly fought Vizsla and his darksaber. Bo-Katan attempted to stop Ahsoka from escaping, but failed. The next shady dealing Bo-Katan had was when Death Watch discovered Maul and Savage Opress floating wounded and unconscious in an escape pod. Bo-Katan asked if she should kill them, but Vizsla decided to keep them around and eventually entered into an arrangement with the Horn Bros. It turned out Obi-Wan Kenobi was hated by both groups. With Bo-Katan's help, they conquered several large criminal cartels and formed the Shadow Collective. Maul and Vizsla had their criminals create disturbances on Mandalore to undermine Bo-Katan's sister, though at this point Bo-Katan was starting to have second thoughts, which seems pretty late to be having. By that stage of adulthood, most people have had dozens of thoughts at least. Vizsla assured her that they'd kill Maul and the other criminals once he had assumed power. Through several dramatic and action-packed moments on TV, Bo-Katan helped depose her sister, arrest Maul, and capture a bunch of criminals. Maul eventually got loose, and as is the way of all balanced and fair forms of government, challenged Vizsla to fight to the death so he could be the ruler of Mandalore instead of Vizsla. Vizsla couldn't see the problem with that and got beheaded, allowing Maul to become the ruler of Mandalore. As an aside, I wonder if Maul can be translated to mean Vizsla, which would help make Vizsla's name make more sense. Anyway, Bo-Katan wasn't cool with Maul taking over her planet and murdering the terrorists she had served for years. She refused to follow Maul, Maul ordered the Death Watch to attack her night owls, and a big fight happened and Bo-Katan bravely ran away. Later, Bo-Katan would try to rescue her sister Satine, but they were foiled after Satine sent a message to Obi-Wan to save her. Turns out he was her only hope. Obi-Wan and Bo-Katan then tried to rescue Satine, but Maul ambushed them and killed Satine. Obi-Wan got all sad and then escaped because he had movies to eventually show up in. I'm guessing Leia never heard about this Kenobi epic fail, or she may have used different words in her message to Obi-Wan years later. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I feel deeply nervous that you're my only hope. Bo-Katan wouldn't give up on her planet, so she and her night owls worked in secret to track Maul and his Shadow Collective, which ended up with her encountering Ahsoka Tano again. Bo-Katan probably would have liked to slap her butt again, but instead recruited Ahsoka to help her with the whole Maul ruling her planet problem that she had. Ahsoka, who had left the Jedi Order and may have been up to having her butt slapped, decided to help Bo-Katan, and with the help of the Republic and Rex, pushed Maul off of Mandalore right before Order 66 happened. Bo-Katan stepped into leading her people, but alas, it didn't last long. Newly christened Emperor Palpatine demanded that Mandalore join the Empire, and when Bo-Katan got all snooty and refused, he used the remaining Republic troops on Mandalore to seize control, and Bo-Katan's brief taste of power came to an end. Gar Saxon became the governor, and Bo-Katan's story paused for about 2 decades. Enter the Phoenix Squadron rebels and the exiled Mandalorian Sabine Wren. Sabine had found the darksaber, which Maul had taken to Dathomir. The rebels came back to Mandalore at some point and through various shenanigans and hijinks overthrew Gar Saxon and the Empire on Mandalore. Bo-Katan had helped a little bit, so Sabine gave Bo-Katan the darksaber and therefore another shot at ruling Mandalore. But because Bo-Katan hadn't fought to earn the darksaber, some people on Mandalore refused to follow her. To be fair, she was kind of a grump and not super charismatic. But she couldn't rule them, and eventually Moff Gideon took the darksaber away and bombed the F out of Mandalore in an event called the Great Purge. Years later, Bo-Katan enlisted the help of the attractive Koska Reeves and some other random dude we don't see again. And then later, she recruited the mighty Mando Man himself, Din Djarin, to her cause. Bo-Katan calls Din a child of the Watch, but that isn't to be confused with the Death Watch, who were wiped out sometime after Maul took over Mandalore. Bo-Katan's goal is to take back the darksaber from Moff Gideon so she can be the real ruler of Mandalore. I'm a real ruler! But since Din was the hero of that television show, he predictably ended up with the darksaber, not Starbuck. She's left with angst once again, and that's where we leave her story for now. It's a super long story, and we even skipped 20 years. In terms of replacing Galaxy of Heroes, Bo-Katan is a bit of a disappointment. Despite her resolve to not follow Maul, the only squad she's actually good in is with Maul as lead. She can try to lead other Mandos, but isn't very good at it. It's an unkind example of when the game follows the lore exactly. She passively heals her team when they attack out of turn, does some cool shooty things and spinny tricks like Dispel and Daze, and that's about it. Modding her is somewhat simple. She doesn't do much damage, so making her a little bit tanky and a little bit potent so she can apply Daze is probably the best approach. Maybe put some speed mods on her. It doesn't really matter. She's not too fast. Or bright. Unfortunately, Bo-Katan enters another level of disappointment for me. She is the first and last character that I ever fully wailed out on. Gamble pack after gamble pack eventually resulted in a character I didn't need for anything other than to help unlock Bo-Katan's sister's ex-boyfriend, Jedi Master Kenobi. Bo-Katan wants to be the ruler of Mandalore and be a leader in-game, but has always been a little disappointing and lacking in both endeavors. She's kept touch with her butt-slapping friend Ahsoka, and for some reason Din Djarin seems to like her, so maybe her friends will help her get to where she's trying to go. Will she get another version in-game where she's actually a capable leader? Will Bo-Katan ever amount to much? That remains to be seen, and it looks like maybe Mandalorian Season 3 will answer that question, at least in part. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember that in all things, unlike Bo-Katan, Zareth prevails.